Hi, I'm Kat Fitzpatrick, and I'm the author of For the Love of Vietnam, A War, a Family, a CIA Official, and the Best Evacuation Story Never Heard. At the end of the Vietnam War, my father rescued 1,000 people, a thousand South Vietnamese who would have otherwise been left in the country to face a fate possibly worse than death. I grew up with these stories, and over the years, finally put it into a book after many people asked to please just write it all down. This book has three parts. The beginning is just about my father, a straight kind of biography. The second part is about the 9 months my family spent in country with him, thinking that everything was getting better. That's what the American government said. And then being evacuated out in April, just before the fall of Saigon. The third part is about his rescue. I wrote it as if I were there with him, looking over his shoulder, scene by scene, pacing it right along, just like a thriller, kind of. I've been told that it's not a good story to start reading late at night because you'll be up all night reading, which is very satisfying. This month, I am doing a post about July, because it's July, 50 years ago that we moved there. The chapter that is included in another YouTube video goes over how I felt arriving. My mom was very excited to be in Saigon. It was a beautiful city. Just a few months later, she would say that it was almost, she was claustrophobic, and it was so hard for those of us who loved the great outdoors. We moved to Vietnam from Taiwan. And in Taiwan, we had a huge house, a sprawling yard. I think the yard must have covered an acre, acre and a half. My brothers used to ride their mini bike around it. We would run with the dogs and the other families in the compound. And we had free reign. One of my weirdest memories is that my brother John, Jimmy, and I decided to climb the wall for some reason that led to the apartments on the other side. Those were where some local Taiwanese lived. And as we got to the top, the wall was covered with pieces of broken glass, and that was meant to keep people from coming in or out. I don't know how we really maybe it was all broken down, because I can almost remember the feeling of the pressure of the glass on my knees, but I don't remember getting cut. And then there was a deep, steep drop. I'm thinking now, if a third grader I knew was climbing on a wall where the other side was probably 2 stories down, I would put them in timeout. But for myself and my brother, somehow the gentleman who lived in the apartment just on the other side of the wall saw us and invited us, and we stepped onto the balcony. He must have spoken English, but I remember being really shy and just wanting to get back home. And I've said, people have asked to hear more about my memories of my childhood living overseas. Unfortunately, they are very sporadic. One time I was riding in a car and in Saigon, and in the distance were what kind of looked like fireworks. I was like, "Dad, what's that?" And he reluctantly, maybe a little guiltily, said, "Artillery fire." So I was 8 years old, and I was like, "I don't even know what artillery fire is. Doesn't look very good, but I don't know what it is." And I recently realized that's sort of what my memories are like, just these sparks on the horizon, little itty bitty indications of something that is happening or happened, but I don't have a full story. However, in light of inspiring other people to share their memories and sharing what I have to share, which I believe strongly in, is one of all of our calls in life, is to share what we can share when we can share it, however we can. My memories of moving to Saigon in July 1974, as sporadic as they are, I described in this chapter we had a really large house. Now, if you don't know, before the U.S. was involved in Vietnam, the country was occupied by France. It was a French colony. The French were not good to the Vietnamese. However, they did leave a lot of very nice high-ceilinged buildings, and one of those became our home at 90 Lee Quan Tran Street. And walking into it, for some reason, I remember the little blue tiles, and I remember the windows. They weren't glass, at least the ones I saw initially. They were plastic. And when I asked my older brother Chris, why that was, he said, in case of bombs, in case bombs land near us, they won't shatter. And in my little 8-year-old mind, I was trying to make sense of this. Why are we in a place where bombs land? But that I couldn't ask that question, so I thought, well, I'm glad somebody's looking out for us. At least we won't get shattered glass on us. And that was my first experience, I think, and really probably not my first one considering we grew up overseas, but it was a significant experience in normalizing things. Then we walked into the center of the house, in which was a fish pond. At the time, I don't think I thought it was a fish pond. I'm like, look, our own personal pool. It was probably about 18 inches deep by 4 feet wide by 6 feet long, but it looked fantastic to me. Within not too long, my dad capped the little spout that would have been in the center to make a fountain so that we could swim in there. We'd go back and forth and splash, and our black poodle Duffy would run back and forth and try to bite the water. We could fit almost all 7 of us kids in there at once in a crowded fashion, but it did become a respite, and especially for my mom, so that she could get some work done around the house while the 7 of us were occupied in the swimming pool. So we had this large 3-story house. It was like a square donut with the center and looking right up to the sky, and a roof garden. So it was all very neat. I lived on the 2nd floor, a long flight of steps up, and they were like concrete marble steps with this metal on the edge grip, but it was like sharp. It's scary. You know, if you fall down, you're either going to crack open your shin or your head. My dad mentioned that in one letter to his sister. Hopefully none of the kids crack open their head on the stairs. So that was also fun. I didn't have my own room. There wasn't enough space in this large house, so my parents had a partition put in, so my brother Jimmy was on one side and I was on the other. I remember one time looking up, and he must have climbed on his dresser, and he was looking down at me, and it was a small memory, but it was kind of eerie and irritating to have a little brother peeping in on you like that. My brother John lived, you actually had to go out on a little balcony to get to his room across the way. And that'll come up in another chapter, but that made him sort of vulnerable to outside forces. I thought it was really neat. He got his own room, almost like his own apartment. But later that would prove to be problematic. And I got another roommate in my small room. Let's see, then you go up to the 3rd floor where my brother Chris and Mike and my sister Marina were housed, and then a large roof. And in August, which I'll talk about next month, we had this big housewarming party, and my dad invited everybody from the embassy and from where he worked in House 7, which was a radio project. I met one of the women who worked closely with my dad, who are still friends, and I'm hoping to be with her next April when we actually cross the line over into the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. And I asked her, were you at that party? Thinking of this particular housewarming party. And she's like, which one? And so it just goes to show, my parents really just loved the people that were there with them and connected, and were constantly having soirees. So that's kind of neat. She also, when I met her for the first time, let's see, that was like in 2014, I think I looked her up and met her in New York City. And one of the first things she said, which was really so neat and endearing, she's like, your parents loved you so much. And there were 7 of us. It was quite the adventure living overseas for 5 years when we were young, and it couldn't have been easy. But that one of the first words out of the mouth of this Vietnamese friend was that your parents loved you so much. So despite the fact that they took us into a war zone in 1974, they didn't know it. Again, at the time, the American government was trying very hard to say that the Paris Peace Accords signed in 1973 were a success. There was a ceasefire, the North Vietnamese had been pacified, and things were looking good. Of course, this was a sort of a smokescreen, just trying to get us out of the country with grace and dignity, which anybody who knows about the end of the Vietnam War knows that ultimately that didn't happen. As they say, the truth will out. Fortunately, our family, we got out safe, and my dad did help 1,000 people to get out who the ones that I know of have lived a very good life here in the US, but they did lose their entire home and country almost 50 years ago because of war and because of policy and because of things that I have no control over and yet I'm somehow inexplicably connected with. Thanks for sharing this journey. Again, my name is Kat Fitzpatrick, and I'm just looking forward to sharing what I can share about the Vietnam War in hopes that it sparks some interest in you, and perhaps over time, maybe we'll all come to some greater understanding of what it all meant, what it means now, and what it might mean for our future. Do take care, and until next time.